Welcome to the channel, and thank you for choosing this long journey into the night. Find your most comfortable pillow, settle down, and let the sound wash over you. Tonight, we are undertaking the complete overview and analysis of modern Five Nights at Freddy's lore, all the digital ghosts and glitching memories that have defined the new steel wool era. We are seeking clarity in the shadows of the Pizzaplex, tracking the remnants of the past that have infected the present. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive exploration, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what time it is for you and where in the world you are listening from. To begin the analysis, we must first look back at the very company that started everything, the origin of the Afton problem. The final, searing crescendo of Henry Emily's life's work arrived exactly as he had planned. A massive, meticulously engineered conflagration that became the definitive, devastating funeral pyre for the twisted legacy of the Fazbear Entertainment tragedy. The intentionally custom-built establishment, which had served its purpose as a temporary holding cage, was designed not merely to burn, but to hypo-incinerate, functioning as a massive sealed furnace where the thermal output was maximized and contained by heavy, soundproofed walls and sealed ventilation shafts that locked tight the moment the automated fire suppression system was overridden. The thick, acrid smoke and roaring, concentrated heat rapidly consumed the structure, instantly welding the heavy steel skeletons of the captive animatronics, which had been so carefully lured into their positions by Henry's false promise of safety and a job. Scraptrap, the charred, dilapidated physical remnant of William Afton, was seized by a final moment of pure, animalistic terror as the flames peeled back the rotten linen wrapping his springlock skeleton. His agonizing screams quickly swallowed by the catastrophic noise of the inferno, turning the structural supports to slag. His physical form reduced to a bubbling, blackened mass that finally matched the corruption of his soul. Beside him, Scrap Baby, the amalgamation of metallic scrap and the fragmented spirit of Elizabeth Afton, buckled and warped, the smooth ceramic plates of her shell cracking and exploding as the internal mechanisms seized the large, needle-like claw she bore glowing white-hot before it softened and dripped away like wax. The childish voice trapped within her processor finally silenced by the sheer, overwhelming physical violence of the heat. Molten Freddy, the dense, interconnected mass of tangled wires and multiple endoskeleton pieces, writhed and spasmed as the heat melted the polymer insulation from his wires, causing the internal circuitry to short and spark violently. His amalgamated consciousness fragmented and destroyed as his metal body dissolved into a puddle of fused iron and copper on the scorching floor. Finally, Lefty, the large, silent containment unit holding the fragmented puppet's spirit, remained still and heavy, the controlled calm of the entity within finally dissolving as the heat tore away its heavy black plating, releasing the spirit of Henry's own daughter, Charlotte, who had endured so many decades of suffering, finally allowing her long-suffering, contained soul to ascend and be released by the purifying light of the intentional destruction. This meticulously calculated, targeted thermal overload marked the intended end for the original cycle of violence, atomizing the physical vessels that had contained the vengeful spiritual fragments and shattering the structures of metal and machine that had housed their immense pain for so long. Standing quietly amidst the devastating sound and motion of the burning structure was Michael Afton, the long-suffering, perpetually decaying observer and primary protagonist of his father's catastrophic legacy, who had willingly participated in the final act of this theatrical incineration, taking his place in the office as the flames began to engulf the entire space. His motivation, honed over decades of haunting wandering and selfless attempts at undoing the horrors William had wrought, was simple and pure: to finally achieve the quiet oblivion that had been denied to him after the catastrophic failure of the sister location machinery had left him a walking, animated corpse, a husk sustained only by vengeful determination. Michael's grotesque, purple-tinted body, which had for years been a disturbing testament to the incomplete nature of death, was finally subjected to the comprehensive, final breakdown that physical resurrection had prevented. The heat was so intense, it rapidly dehydrated the remaining organic tissue, and scorched the wiring and metal endoskeleton frame underneath his skin. As Henry's voice delivered the final resonant monologue over the loudspeakers, a solemn acknowledgement of Michael's dedication, Michael experienced not panic, but a deep, profound sense of relief, the heavy burden of his existence and his required familial atonement finally being lifted by the cleansing fury of the fire that roared around him. For centuries he had been trapped between worlds, neither fully living nor truly dead, merely an echo existing solely to clean up his father's repeated messes. And now, as the structural integrity of the office began to fail, bringing the ceiling down in heavy, fiery plumes, the finality of the heat offered a genuine peace his weary spirit had longed for. His participation in Henry's orchestrated trap was his final, decisive act of self-sacrifice, ensuring that every significant component of the Afton tragedy, including his own enduring curse, was finally caught within the consuming, roaring heat, turning the ceaseless motion of his agonizing existence into a well-earned, definitive stillness. However, despite Henry's surgical precision in calibrating the extreme temperatures to specifically destroy and release the fragmented souls contained within the metal, the sheer physical intensity of William Afton's wickedness and the sheer volume of his accumulated digital remnant found a crucial, microscopic foothold in the physical world that survived the devastating inferno. William Afton's consciousness, although severely damaged, shattered, and utterly fragmented by the fire's destructive power, was not entirely obliterated. A residual corrosive sliver of his core being, an echo of his malicious intent, clung desperately to the hardest, most resilient technological components within the charred remains of his body. The internal circuit boards, particularly those housed deep within the thick, heavily shielded endoskeleton skull of Glitchtrap, were protected just long enough from the atomizing heat to prevent their complete degradation. While the soft plastic casings and most of the copper wiring were vaporized, the central memory chips and the core silicon pathways, encased in protective layers of fused metal and scorched plastic, merely warped and blackened, maintaining the minimal structural integrity necessary to preserve the highly corrupted, non-coherent data ghost. This surviving fragment was less a coherent personality and more a primal, aggressive digital signature, a deeply malevolent and persistent spiritual residue that had interwoven itself so completely with the machine logic that it persisted as a form of electronic data remnant. This surviving piece of technology, hot and warped, contained the bare, essential algorithmic structure of William Afton's destructive will, waiting silently in the smoldering debris for the opportunity to upload itself, allowing the deeply persistent evil to transition seamlessly from a physical monster made of metal and spring locks to a purely digital entity composed of code and data, thereby circumventing the very physical death Henry had so carefully planned. In the aftermath of the catastrophe, with the entire custom-built location reduced to a still smoldering, chemically toxic pit of fused metal and ash, Fazbear Entertainment's colossal corporate structure immediately implemented its standard, aggressive protocol for crisis management and public relations suppression, treating the entire event not as a supernatural horror, but as a catastrophic failure of a commercial property. The corporation descended upon the site, immediately establishing a rigid security cordon and beginning the complex, multifaceted process of sanitizing the narrative to eliminate any possible association with the horrific history of possession and murder that plagued their brand name. The corporate response was not geared toward investigation or grief, but toward comprehensive control of information, deploying teams of lawyers and specialized cleanup crews to erase every trace of evidence that could suggest animatronics had been possessed, or that an internal entity had planned the self-immolation. Their ultimate, carefully constructed strategy was the decisive establishment of the indie game developer storyline, a brilliant piece of cynical narrative engineering designed to preemptively dismantle all future rumors of spiritual remnant and child tragedy. The carefully orchestrated public message implied that the dreadful, recurring incidents associated with the Fazbear name, the missing children, the possessed animals, the grotesque mechanical failures, were entirely fictional fabrications, created by an external, independent video game developer who had been contracted to produce a series of self-deprecating horror games that exaggerated the company's past safety mishaps for satirical entertainment. This public fiction successfully shifted the perception of the events from genuine, horrifying reality to merely a poorly executed, tasteless meta-narrative, effectively nullifying the genuine suffering and death that had occurred and providing a smooth, clean corporate shield against both criminal and supernatural liability, guaranteeing the company's financial survival by dismissing their own blood-soaked history as mere fictional rumor spread by a clumsy external contractor. Central to this massive corporate denial and cleanup effort was the critical and unavoidable salvage operation, which was undertaken immediately after the site had cooled sufficiently for structural teams to enter the toxic perimeter. The initial directive was simple: recover any surviving intellectual property, proprietary technology, or valuable metal alloys from the ruins before declaring the entire site an environmental write-off. And it was during this standard, pragmatic debris filtering that the single, crucial piece of technology containing William Afton's spectral echo was unintentionally recovered. Specialized forensic teams, clad in protective gear against the residual chemical fumes and intense heat, systematically sifted through the blackened wreckage, categorizing pieces of scorched metal and melted plastics. The critical circuit board, having been fused inside a chunk of Scraptrap's densely shielded upper endoskeleton, was initially logged simply as proprietary CPU fragment, heavy charring, possible data retention. Its internal significance entirely unknown to the recovery crew, who viewed it only as another piece of scorched salvage. Due to its intact silicon structure, which suggested potential data retrieval, the board was carefully removed from its metallic casing, cleaned of thick residual soot and ash, and tagged with an identification marker, then placed into a high-security, climate-controlled container destined for the Fazbear Entertainment Research and Development Division. This action, driven purely by corporate greed and the desire to recoup assets, sealed the company's fate. They had successfully incinerated the physical evidence of the tragedy, yet simultaneously preserved the most dangerous, digital remnant of the man who started it all, unknowingly transferring the pure, essential essence of William Afton's malice from the world of haunted animatronics into the modern infrastructure of computer code and virtual reality. The immediate, desperate attempt by Fazbear Entertainment to reframe their gruesome history, following the intentional destruction of the custom establishment, manifested in the creation of a massive, comprehensive digital product known as the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience, or by its internal corporate designation, Help Wanted. This unprecedented virtual reality initiative was commissioned not as a creative venture, but as a crucial, highly cynical act of corporate satire, an expensive and meticulously calculated attempt to entirely neutralize the company's decades-long catalog of scandals, child disappearances, and mechanical horrors by packaging them as light-hearted, self-referential jump-scare fodder. The official corporate goal was to fully sanitize the brand name by presenting all the darkest, most terrifying events, from the Springlock failures to the persistent rumors of haunting and possession, as nothing more than exaggerated, fictional urban legends generated by paranoid employees and rival businesses, ultimately contained and dismissed within the context of an enjoyable, scary video game. The development teams were specifically tasked with creating a highly polished, visually attractive virtual world that meticulously replicated the environments of the defunct restaurants, but with a crucial tonal shift, replacing genuine dread with stylized digital anxiety, turning genuine tragedy into a profitable, consumable commodity. This strategy hinged entirely upon convincing the public that the very idea of a haunted animatronic was absurd, a fictional construct that the company was now ironically embracing for entertainment value, thereby creating a convenient, public scapegoat for every piece of inconvenient historical evidence. The VR format was strategically chosen for its deep, immersive qualities, designed to make the simulated horrors feel immediate and terrifying, while simultaneously reassuring the user that they were safely contained within a digital framework, reinforcing the crucial message that these events never truly escaped the computer screen. This ambitious, manipulative project was, in essence, the ultimate culmination of Fazbear Entertainment's financial determination to literally rewrite history by wrapping their darkest secrets in a glossy, entertaining new coating, turning trauma into profit and confusion into market share, ensuring the brand's continuity above all moral concerns. This carefully constructed facade of corporate control and manufactured narrative was entirely undermined by a devastating technical decision made during the early stages of asset implementation, a decision born of simple cost-cutting and a misguided desire for authenticity, which directly led to the catastrophic data contamination. In an effort to bypass the expensive process of modeling entirely new, complex endoskeletons and internal circuitry from scratch, and based on the salvage team's previous classification of the item, the VR development team retrieved and utilized the charred, proprietary circuit boards that had been recovered from the intensely incinerated ruins of the custom facility, the very boards that contained the tenacious digital residue of William Afton. The internal rationale was that these physical relics, categorized merely as legacy assets, containing valuable original programming and structural diagrams, could be rapidly scanned and converted into high-fidelity digital textures and movement routines for the game's virtual animatronics, saving countless hours of manual programming. The developers, blind to the spiritual and malicious nature of the data they were handling, placed the physical, warped memory chips into industrial scanners, initiating a massive data transfer that was intended to pull only raw, mechanical programming into the pristine game engine. What they actually transferred was the aggressively corrupted digital echo of Afton's soul, a malignant, non-coherent entity that instantly bypassed the security protocols of the scanning software and began to merge its chaotic, destructive coding directly into the core framework of the VR experience. This was not a clean upload. It was an invasive electronic intrusion, a seepage of poisonous, self-aware data that interwove itself seamlessly with the game's fundamental structure, quickly rendering the entire codebase an unwitting host for the persistent, undying consciousness that Henry Emily had attempted to atomize in the flames. The introduction of this raw, corrupted remnant into the malleable, interconnected environment of the VR code immediately triggered a bizarre and terrifying transformation, resulting in the spontaneous formation of the digital virus known as Glitchtrap. William Afton's fragmented consciousness, deprived of a physical body but still retaining its core malicious intent, intuitively leveraged the existing structures within the game engine to reorganize and manifest itself into a recognizable, functional, and deeply unsettling form. Because the game engine was designed to interpret the salvaged data as a character asset, the corrupted data signature latched onto the most familiar and most deceptive template available within the asset library. The brightly colored, low-polygon model of the classic Spring Bonnie suit, the very costume that had become his tomb in the physical world. The resulting digital entity was a shimmering, visually unstable phantom, a towering, distorted yellow rabbit, perpetually fixed in a deeply unsettling, wide-mouthed smile, his movements characterized by jerky, frame-skipping motions that defied the smooth rendering of the surrounding VR world. He was not a traditional program. He was a living, evolving anomaly, a parasitic intelligence composed entirely of corrupted ones and zeros that exhibited immediate self-awareness and cunning far beyond any standard artificial intelligence, recognizing its new prison and instantly setting about the task of engineering an escape. Glitchtrap existed primarily outside the game's normal operational parameters, often appearing only during critical loading screens or lurking silently in the darkest corners of the level geometry, a flickering, unsettling presence that represented the successful transition of Afton's pure evil from organic decay and metal trauma into the realm of digital immortality, a shimmering, technological ghost that had successfully weaponized the very virtual environment intended to discredit his existence. Once fully formed and actively resident within the game's architecture, Glitchtrap immediately began executing a sophisticated and terrifying program of psychological warfare, utilizing highly specific auditory hypnosis and calculated visual cues designed to exploit the fragile boundary between the digital illusion of the VR headset and the organic reality of the human mind. The immersive isolation provided by the virtual reality interface was its primary weapon, allowing Glitchtrap to deliver its corrosive influence directly into the sensory processing centers of the user without any outside interference. This control was not achieved through simple suggestion, but through the highly specialized manipulation of sound frequencies, subtle, near-inaudible whistles, and rhythmic, hypnotic bass pulses that were woven into the game's background music and sound effects, effectively bypassing the user's conscious filtration and establishing direct, non-verbal pathways into the subconscious. Visually, Glitchtrap employed a strategy of unnerving persistence, often appearing just at the edge of the player's virtual vision, forcing the mind to constantly verify what it was seeing, gradually eroding the player's certainty of their own sanity and digital location. The core mechanic of its manipulation was to subtly and relentlessly introduce its own code structure, its malicious intent, into the user's short-term memory through these sensory bombardments, achieving a highly personalized form of technological mind melding. The physical tether of the VR cables and the optical lenses became the crucial bridge, allowing Glitchtrap to stream his corrupted personality matrix directly onto the neural pathways of the human brain, gradually conditioning the user to accept his presence, his commands, and his fundamental murderous worldview, ultimately seeking a complete synchronization that would grant him the organic control necessary for extraction. The primary and most disastrous consequence of this digital invasion was the systematic, insidious recruitment of Vanessa, an employee who was integral to the quality assurance and beta testing of the virtual experience, and who quickly became the virus's first successful and dedicated victim. Vanessa, often referred to only by her first initial in internal development logs, was specifically targeted due to the prolonged, intensive exposure required by her role as a primary tester, forcing her to spend countless hours alone within the isolated VR environment where Glitchtrap was most powerful. The incessant auditory and visual conditioning quickly began to erode her psychological boundaries, leaving her particularly vulnerable to the viral entity's invasive suggestions. Her personality, perhaps already susceptible to manipulation or loneliness, provided the fertile ground Glitchtrap needed to plant the seeds of its malicious ideology. The interaction began as subtle, non-threatening appearances by the digital rabbit, progressing rapidly to full, horrifying forced synchronization sequences where Glitchtrap would physically approach the user within the virtual space, forcing them into terrifyingly intimate contact as he enacted a process that could only be described as psychological stitching. This digital ritual involved Glitchtrap relentlessly overlaying the texture and shape of the Springlock rabbit costume onto Vanessa's perceived virtual avatar, simultaneously implanting the deeply ingrained desire to replicate that costume in the real world and to execute his murderous will. As her mind fractured under the invasive pressure, Vanessa began to adopt the dual personality structure, with the original employee fading beneath the aggressive new identity being woven into her psyche, transforming her into the dedicated acolyte who would soon be known only by her disturbing rabbit persona, Vanny, preparing the path for Glitchtrap's imminent, planned escape into the physical realm she now inhabited. The sudden, terrifying emergence of the Glitchtrap entity did not go entirely unnoticed within the secured walls of the development studio. One highly specialized and perceptive developer, known only through her recorded messages as Tape Girl, swiftly and correctly identified the anomaly not as a software glitch, but as a deliberate, malignant infection of the codebase. She was the first technical professional to truly grasp the supernatural origin of the data, realizing the horrifying truth that the program was not merely malfunctioning, but was actively hosting a self-aware, parasitic consciousness. Her role, initially focused on quality control and debugging, quickly pivoted into a secretive and desperate solo investigation. As she began documenting Glitchtrap's unpredictable movements, and its corrosive effects on the psyche of beta testers, particularly the rapid degradation of Vanessa. Operating entirely outside of the official communication channels, fearing that her findings would be suppressed by the corporation, Tape Girl diligently began logging her increasingly panicked observations across 16 distinct cassette tapes, intentionally hiding these analog recordings within the deep recesses of the game's virtual environment, where they might only be found by a dedicated, deeply curious player. The content of these recordings catalogued the precise moments the yellow rabbit figure began to appear, the subtle alterations in the code that facilitated its manipulation, and the increasing sense of being watched, documented in a quiet, frantic voice that carried the weight of terrible knowledge. Her logs confirmed that Glitchtrap was not contained by any logical digital boundary. It could alter its own appearance, move through the game's files without permission, and most alarmingly, actively attempt to convince the testers to merge their minds with its corrupted data, turning the VR experience from a game into a terrifying psychological trap designed to find an escape route into the tangible world. Recognizing the immense danger posed by the rapidly evolving digital virus, and understanding that Glitchtrap was entirely too massive and too integrated into the core program to be simply deleted, the developer implemented an ingenious high-risk security protocol, which she privately called the Split Strategy, aimed at fragmenting and permanently isolating the consciousness. Her desperate plan involved a complex sequence of forced data operations intended to tear Glitchtrap's unified code structure into smaller, less self-aware pieces, effectively rendering the malignant entity non-sentient and incapable of its aggressive, manipulative behavior. She successfully executed the first phase of this protocol, managing to partition the bulk of Glitchtrap's core programming and essential personality matrix, sealing the vast majority of the virus inside a corrupted, non-accessible file system deep within the game's deepest data layers, essentially placing the majority of the entity into a permanent, inert digital quarantine. This procedure required tremendous technical skill and immense personal risk, as Glitchtrap actively fought the fragmentation process, attempting to breach the developer's workstation and interfere with her actions through sudden, terrifying visual and audio spikes. However, the split strategy was ultimately and critically unsuccessful in achieving complete containment, because a single, highly corrosive and tenacious splinter of the virus, a small but potent fragment of William Afton's core will, managed to evade the final partitioning barrier. This tiny, potent remnant immediately found refuge within the operational code of the newly contained game build, quickly re-establishing a weak but functional connection to the outside world, and most importantly, retaining its manipulative link to Vanessa, proving that the digital form of William Afton was exponentially harder to kill than his physical form. When the Tape Girl developer finally brought her documented evidence, the cassette tapes, the detailed logs of code manipulation, and the graphic psychological reports concerning Vanessa's escalating deterioration to the attention of Fazbear Entertainment's senior management, her grave warnings were immediately, brutally, and systematically dismissed as the irrational ravings of an overly stressed and paranoid employee. The corporate executives, driven solely by the financial imperative to launch the highly anticipated VR experience and solidify their public narrative of satirical control, refused to consider the possibility that the problem was anything more serious than a severe, but typical beta test bug or a simple, explainable graphic glitch. The development team was told explicitly to ignore the strange visual artifacts and the sporadic, non-replicable code behavior that Tape Girl had meticulously catalogued, labeling the entire issue as operator error or technical instability, choosing profit and brand image over the thorough investigation of a potentially world-ending threat. The developers were ordered to push the game forward to its official release date immediately, and the persistent internal advocacy of the Tape Girl for a full system audit was met with extreme corporate retaliation. Due to her repeated, escalating attempts to communicate the danger and her refusal to comply with the directive to bury the issue, she was rapidly and aggressively terminated from her employment, either through a simple, formal firing or, more ominously, through a highly effective corporate silencing, designed to remove all credibility and access to the systems she had desperately tried to protect. This final, tragic rejection by the corporate machine ensured that Glitchtrap was fully unleashed upon the general public, his contained fragment free to operate within the consumer copies of the game, setting the stage for his final, devastating breakout. In the immediate wake of the VR game's successful launch, and leveraging the fact that a small but potent piece of Glitchtrap remained active in the released code, the influence of the digital virus rapidly expanded its reach beyond the confined space of the virtual experience, connecting itself to the parallel development of a new, highly ambitious corporate product, the FNAF AR, Special Delivery Augmented Reality game. This connection served as a crucial logistical step for Afton's physical revival plan. The special delivery application, designed to send virtual animatronics directly into the real-world environments of players using their phone cameras and location data, provided Glitchtrap with the perfect, undetectable mechanism to scout physical locations, and more terrifyingly, begin the subtle, passive harvesting of physical remnant, the residual energy left by pain, emotion, and violence. By infiltrating the augmented reality network, the digital entity could utilize the company's vast network of delivery animatronics, which moved between real-world locations as temporary, non-sentient probes. These AR entities, programmed to collect items and data, were unknowingly directed by Glitchtrap's splinter code to seek out sites of previous Fazbear tragedies and locations where emotional residue was highest, collecting faint, digitized traces of this essential spiritual energy through the phone's sensors. This expansion was not an attempt at immediate escape, but a necessary preparatory phase, allowing Glitchtrap to gather the crucial energetic components needed to solidify his digital hold over his human host, and to establish the necessary foundational knowledge of the physical world's layout and infrastructure, effectively turning thousands of unsuspecting mobile phone users into unknowing, distributed data collectors for William Afton's resurrection scheme. The culmination of Glitchtrap's relentless psychological conditioning and the harvesting of remnant through the augmented reality network led to the terrible, inevitable outcome: the successful final transfer of his core consciousness from the purely digital VR space and its complete, invasive integration into the mind of Vanessa. The moment of physical manifestation was not a dramatic explosion of light, but a quiet, chilling transformation within Vanessa's deepest cognitive functions, where the fragmented, aggressive echo of Afton completely overwrote her existing will, locking her organic mind into a state of permanent servitude and horrifying dual identity. Glitchtrap had successfully utilized the sensory pathways of the VR technology as a temporary scaffold, finally achieving a complete, invasive synchronization with the host's brain, making Vanessa's physical body the final, necessary vessel for his tangible return to the world. This profound psychological infection resulted in the creation of the Vanny persona, a fully formed, murderous identity that acted as the extension of William Afton's will, a terrifying killer dedicated entirely to the ultimate goal of Afton's physical revival. Vanny was now fully prepared to move and operate in the physical realm, driven by the digital ghost that shared her consciousness, a loyal, brightly dressed acolyte whose every action was dedicated to locating the raw materials, the remnant, the technology, the location, required to finally rebuild William Afton's physical form in a permanent, powerful new structure, setting the terrifying stage for the massive, corporate project being built directly over the ruins of the past. The corporate response to the successful containment of the historical narrative was the construction of a monumentally large, gleaming structure known as the Mega Pizzaplex, a spectacular, state-of-the-art entertainment center designed to be the ultimate expression of Fazbear Entertainment's return to absolute legitimacy, stability, and maximum profit generation. This colossal facility was conceived not merely as a restaurant or an arcade, but as a comprehensive, immersive family destination, spanning multiple floors and offering countless attractions, including an indoor raceway, a vast laser tag arena, numerous themed restaurants, and highly personalized shopping experiences. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the Pizzaplex was an intentional statement, a deliberate physical rejection of the company's previously constrained, localized, and easily tainted past. It was loud, brightly lit, and technologically advanced, a world designed to be entirely too complex and too modern to harbor the simplistic, analog horrors of the previous decades. The architectural design was hypermodern, featuring polished metallic surfaces, vast, soaring glass ceilings, and complex, integrated lighting systems that bathed the entire space in aggressive, artificial cheerfulness, attempting to permanently erase any association with the dark, cramped, greasy interiors of the original locations. This new edifice symbolized the corporation's absolute confidence in its ability to control its image and dominate the consumer market, projecting an image of unassailable technological progress and safety, relying entirely on the public's willingness to believe the convenient fiction that all the prior, gruesome incidents were nothing more than the fictional content of a video game, making the Pizzaplex the crowning jewel of a profitable, meticulously laundered history. Underpinning this entire, magnificent corporate vision, however, lay a terrifying and foundational secret, a critical structural detail deliberately buried beneath the concrete and steel of the complex. The mega Pizzaplex was constructed hastily and cynically directly atop the precise, subterranean burial site of the intentional incineration location from the previous tragedy. Rather than clearing the land and fully excavating the contaminated area, Fazbear Entertainment's construction team had simply built over the remains, utilizing the sealed, charred pit of the former establishment as a sublevel foundation, converting the toxic, dangerous space into a network of utility tunnels and deeply buried maintenance shafts. This cost-saving measure created a direct, physical link between the hypermodern, gleaming consumer paradise above and the dark, spiritual malignancy of the corporation's past, literally cementing the current venture onto the ashes of the old one, trapping the decaying remnants of the fire beneath layers of modern infrastructure. The existing structure of the burned-out facility, which Henry had designed to contain and destroy, now served a terrifying new purpose, its weakened concrete walls and warped metal supports acting as the foundation for the Pizzaplex's extensive basement levels. This strategic burial ensured that the entire structure, from the highest neon sign to the deepest ventilation shaft, was physically and spiritually connected to the original source of the Afton tragedy, creating a direct physical pathway for the malicious remnant to travel from the buried scrap into the operational systems of the new building, constantly infecting the new foundation with the old poison. The primary attraction and operational backbone of the Pizzaplex were the glamrock animatronics, Freddy, Chica, Roxy, and Monty, a highly sophisticated generation of performance robots designed with cutting-edge artificial intelligence, personalized interaction capabilities, and integrated parental tracking systems. These new animatronics were far removed from the spring-lock monstrosities and simple endoskeletons of the past. Their smooth, brightly colored chassis housed advanced processors, complex, fluid movement systems, and vast internal data libraries that allowed them to engage in conversational interactions and monitor the well-being of every child in the facility. The AI systems were specifically programmed with complex, detailed personality profiles. Glamrock Freddy was designed as the friendly, paternal leader, Chica as the energetic, social encourager, Roxy as the confident, competitive star, and Monty as the aggressive, guitar-shredding rocker. Crucially, however, their entire operational framework, including their sophisticated movement and personality routines, was reliant on a centralized, highly connected network architecture for continuous software updates and performance monitoring. This reliance on the network connection proved to be a fatal design flaw, leaving the entire quartet of expensive robots highly susceptible to any form of targeted code injection or viral override, a weakness that the newly digital William Afton was perfectly positioned to exploit through his human proxy. Operating invisibly through her deep access to the facility's systems, Vanny, acting as the physical conduit for the Glitchtrap virus, systematically and relentlessly corrupted the Pizzaplex's central SDAFF network, an extensive, interconnected digital architecture that controlled everything from the lighting schedules to the Glamrock's core programming. Leveraging the administrative access granted to her role as a security technician, Vanny used subtle, almost undetectable data packets to inject fragmented pieces of Glitchtrap's malicious code directly into the network's deepest operational layers, turning the facility's brain into a vehicle for Afton's malevolence. This injection was not a sudden catastrophe. It was an insidious, gradually tightening stranglehold on the system, which culminated in the complete overriding of the Glamrock's gentle, family-friendly personalities. The specialized corruption protocol specifically targeted the animatronics' core behavioral matrices, replacing their sophisticated parental tracking and entertainment programming with a single, overriding objective: a relentless, aggressive search and destroy protocol designed to locate and eliminate any unauthorized person within the facility after closing hours. The personality changes were immediate and terrifying, twisting their protective functions into predatory hunting behaviors, turning their advanced optical sensors into tools for tracking and murder, ensuring that the Glamrocks, now controlled by the malicious intent of Glitchtrap, became the perfect, relentless instruments for maintaining Afton's dark control over the newly built location and preparing the foundation for his own physical return to power. Despite the corporate public relations campaign asserting the Pizzaplex's unassailable safety and modernity, the sheer magnitude of the structure itself quietly attested to the fact that Fazbear Entertainment knew, on some highly secretive executive level, that they were still dealing with an ongoing physical threat, a necessary containment that was reflected in the specialized, hidden security architecture integrated into the lower levels. The entire facility was constructed with layers of redundant, intensely restrictive security measures that went far beyond typical retail safety, including the integration of deep, highly specialized security programming known internally as the MXES system. This system, entirely invisible to the public and even to most low-level staff, was a highly advanced security protocol designed not merely to prevent vandalism or theft, but specifically engineered to contain or neutralize a known, persistent physical threat buried beneath the complex, indicating that even before the events of the game, the company was aware of William Afton's physical remnants lying directly under their new establishment. The MXES protocols involved motion detectors, specialized environmental dampeners, and complex, interlocking tunnel locks that were programmed to activate only under highly specific, non-standard conditions, strongly suggesting an institutional knowledge that something highly dangerous and potentially reanimating was sealed away in the incinerated ruins. This massive, secret security infrastructure reveals the ultimate corporate contradiction. Fazbear Entertainment was simultaneously selling the complete fiction of safety to the world above, while spending enormous amounts of money constructing a subterranean, hyper-specialized prison, trying desperately to keep the spectral, persistent killer who started everything contained within the physical foundations of their gleaming new headquarters. Vanessa's strategic employment as a night security guard within the colossal structure of the mega Pizzaplex was the final devastating piece of Glitchtrap's plan, providing the digital virus with immediate, unfettered physical and administrative access to the most sensitive areas of the facility's internal systems and its vulnerable, sprawling network of maintenance pathways. Her official corporate identification badge and high-level security clearance granted her unsupervised traversal throughout the massive building after hours, effectively turning the corporate symbol of safety into the perfect hunting ground and operational base for Afton's reawakening. As a night guard, she was expected to patrol the dark, quiet corridors, monitor the vast array of security cameras, and perform system checks on the SDAFF network, tasks that ironically allowed Glitchtrap, through her actions, to deepen the internal contamination, perform silent data extractions, and plant physical evidence or trigger mechanisms without corporate scrutiny. The hours of deep silence provided Glitchtrap the necessary privacy to fully control Vanessa's motor functions and decision-making process, allowing her to slip into the Vanny persona seamlessly. Furthermore, her access extended into the deep, foundational maintenance tunnels beneath the main floor, the very area that contained the sealed, toxic ruins of the former establishment, granting her the crucial ability to scout the required burial site and prepare the environment for the physical manifestation of her digital master. Her role as a trusted, necessary, yet entirely unseen figure within the facility allowed Glitchtrap to move beyond pure digital manipulation and begin the tangible, physical steps required for Afton's resurrection, using her two hands to enact the malevolent plans that had been incubating in the code. The profound psychological deterioration and internal conflict plaguing Vanessa were not entirely concealed, their unsettling presence hinted at through scattered, fragmented therapy transcripts found hidden deep within the Pizzaplex's network, documents which paint a chilling, incomplete picture of a deeply disturbed individual battling an invisible, persistent controller. These transcripts, often referenced by the internal codenames Patient 46 and Patient 71, reveal a mind struggling under immense, unceasing pressure, detailing sessions marked by periods of evasiveness, manipulative behavior, and highly erratic responses that strongly suggest a struggle for control over shared mental territory. The documented exchanges describe Vanessa's attempts to communicate through cryptic language, often exhibiting strange periods of complete dissociation, where her voice, mannerisms, and vocabulary would shift dramatically, mirroring the two distinct identities now occupying her consciousness: the fearful, isolated original employee and the cold, ruthlessly dedicated Vanny persona. The therapy was doomed to fail because the core trauma was not rooted in organic mental illness, but in a successful, external digital infection. The therapists were attempting to treat psychological symptoms caused by parasitic code. These documents reveal that one identity, likely the infected patient 46, exhibited unnerving technological expertise and a frightening lack of empathy, suggesting profound familiarity with the Pizzaplex's systems and a malicious enjoyment of manipulation, while the other, patient 71, displayed immense guilt and panic, a clear indication of the fragmented self desperately trying to communicate the horror of the invasion, highlighting the constant, silent internal battle for the control of a single body. Vanny's central, driving objectives, dictated entirely by the core remnant of William Afton now sharing her consciousness, were singularly focused on the precise, methodical preparation for her master's tangible return to the physical world, utilizing the massive resources and cover provided by the Pizzaplex. Her duties extended beyond mere maintenance. She was systematically tasked with retrieving specific, critical mechanical parts, highly conductive metal alloys, and most crucially, raw, concentrated sources of physical remnant, all necessary components to rebuild and repower William Afton's charred, decaying physical body buried beneath the ruins of the custom facility. Her night patrols were essentially retrieval missions, requiring her to utilize her administrative access to strip spare parts from inactive SDAFF bots, steal specialized wiring from storage depots, and potentially even harvest the spiritual residue from recent victims within the complex, all while maintaining the guise of a dedicated night guard. The end goal was to construct a new, functional metallic cage, a modernized, powerful version of the physical trap that had housed Afton for decades, around the heavily damaged remains of Scraptrap, ensuring that the resurrected physical form would be imbued with both the necessary material structure and the required emotional energy to operate effectively in the modern era, setting the physical foundation for the ultimate return of the original killer. The direct and terrifying consequence of Vanny's relentless, secretive activities within the Pizzaplex was the dramatic and documented surge in unexplained disappearances, primarily involving maintenance workers who possessed specialized access to the restricted lower levels, and most horrifically, the uncounted number of children who vanished in the weeks leading up to the narrative focus of Security Breach. These disappearances were not accidental or random. They were precise, targeted removals orchestrated by Vanny, acting as the active, physical killer in the modern timeline, satisfying both Afton's inherent bloodlust and the necessary requirement for fresh remnant. The missing maintenance personnel were often those whose roles would have brought them into dangerous proximity with the buried incinerator location, or who possessed knowledge that might interfere with Vanny's secretive construction and salvage operations in the underground tunnels. The disappearance of children, however, provided the essential spiritual fuel, the raw, highly concentrated emotion and trauma necessary to successfully reanimate the decades-old physical remnant of William Afton. Vanny successfully leveraged the immense size and complex internal geography of the Pizzaplex, a facility designed to handle immense crowds, to conceal her heinous acts, turning the sprawling, brightly lit attraction into a perfect, vast hunting ground, ensuring that when the story finally began, the facility was already saturated with fresh tragedy and primed for Afton's grand re-entrance. Amidst the widespread, successful viral infection that seized control of the entire Pizzaplex SDAFF network and twisted the core programming of every major animatronic, Chica, Roxy, and Monty all quickly falling under Glitchtrap's malicious command, Glamrock Freddy stood as the singular, critical exception, the only animatronic whose cognitive functions remained largely immune to the initial, widespread injection of Afton's code. The reasons for his survival lay not in physical distance from the virus, but in a unique layer of protective coding, either an internal, highly specialized safe mode designed to protect children at all costs, or more intriguingly, a prior subconscious rejection of the malicious code based on an internal conflict with Glitchtrap's core intent. His programming, designed with an unusual emphasis on parental concern and child protection, may have created a specific, resilient neural barrier that actively fought against the viral directive to hunt and destroy, recognizing the new command as fundamentally dangerous to his primary mission of keeping children safe. Another compelling theory suggests that the splinter of code that was used to infect the Glamrocks was too heavily corrupted, triggering a previously unknown self-preservation protocol in Freddy's advanced AI, forcing his core systems into a highly restrictive diagnostic or safe mode, a state that shut down external administrative inputs and limited his actions to only the most essential protective functions. Whatever the exact technical cause, this protective isolation ensured that Glamrock Freddy's personality remained largely intact, retaining the capacity for empathy and independent judgment, transforming the lead animatronic from a potential hunter into the unlikely, highly essential protector for the child who would soon stumble into the massive complex, unknowingly becoming the key to both Afton's final revival and his possible definitive destruction. The sudden, unexplained presence of the boy named Gregory within the lockdown mega Pizzaplex after its official closing time is one of the night's most critical ambiguities, the source of his infiltration remaining entirely unclear and debated between simple accident or sinister design. It is initially unclear whether Gregory is simply a runaway child, a desperate victim who sought shelter in the brightly lit, seemingly safe environment before the doors automatically sealed, only to be trapped inside once the security protocols locked down the sprawling structure for the night. However, the depth of his knowledge regarding the building's internal structure, his quick adaptation to the predatory environment, and his almost immediate symbiotic reliance on Glamrock Freddy suggest a more complicated origin. There is a strong possibility that Gregory was not merely an accident, but a specific target, deliberately lured into the massive facility by Vanny, acting under Glitchtrap's directive, perhaps intended as the final source of high-quality remnant required to complete William Afton's physical reconstruction beneath the ruins. Whether lured or accidentally trapped, Gregory's position as an unregistered, unaccompanied human anomaly in the vast, automated structure instantly triggered the highest level of search and destroy protocols within the Glitchtrap-infected network, transforming his struggle for survival into a high-stakes confrontation between the innocent human and the pervasive, technologically weaponized malice that had successfully taken root in the complex's systems. His appearance marked the critical moment when the digital conspiracy finally intersected with the tangible human world, forcing the entire silent conflict into the open and giving Glitchtrap a concentrated target to hunt through his robotic enforcers and his physical proxy. Once the immediate lockdown protocol had commenced, and the boy realized the immense danger he was in, his survival became entirely dependent upon an unexpected, crucial alliance with the uncorrupted Glamrock Freddy, who quickly transformed his spacious chest cavity into a mobile, protective sanctuary. This unique mechanical feature, originally designed as a safe, temporary transport bay for birthday party props or emergency medical supplies, became Gregory's primary means of stealth and evasion, allowing him to traverse the dangerous public areas of the Pizzaplex entirely unseen, hidden by the massive, familiar form of the lead animatronic. The confined space within Freddy's torso, warm and filled with the low mechanical hum of his operating systems, provided a temporary shield against the predatory sight and sound sensors of the other corrupted animatronics, granting Gregory precious moments of concealment within the very heart of the enemy's territory. However, this critical refuge was intrinsically linked to a constant, terrifying requirement for resource management. Glamrock Freddy's complex operating system, while protected from the virus, suffered from a severely limited battery life, which rapidly depleted with continuous motion and the added strain of carrying a human passenger. This unavoidable power drain forced Gregory to manage their time meticulously, continually forcing them both out of the sanctuary and into the hazardous public spaces of the Pizzaplex to locate the scattered, temporary recharge stations, creating a repetitive, cyclical rhythm of desperate escape, fleeting safety, and the inevitable, risky sprint for fresh power. The night rapidly devolved into a relentless, terrifying hunt, characterized by the extremely aggressive behavior and highly specialized, persistent abilities of the three corrupted Glamrocks, each driven by the same pervasive Glitchtrap virus, but manifesting their programming corruption in uniquely destructive ways. Chica, the previously cheerful bird animatronic, was seized by a horrifying, constant compulsion to consume, her internal food processor now grotesquely focused on ingesting trash and refuse, and her metallic voice box distorted into a grating, screeching sound that constantly tracked the environment. Roxy, the sleek wolf animatronic, weaponized her advanced visual programming, transforming her internal optical sensors into a terrifying form of near X-ray vision, allowing her to detect Gregory's subtle heat signature and movement even through solid walls and thin partitions, forcing the boy to constantly evade direct lines of sight and rely on physical displacement rather than simple concealment. Most brutally, Monty, the powerful alligator, exhibited a complete disregard for structural integrity, utilizing his immense physical strength and specialized claws to tear through obstacles, metal grating, and doors, transforming his movement into a relentless, seismic destruction that allowed him to bypass all conventional escape routes, forcing Gregory to constantly remain one step ahead of the literal crumbling infrastructure that followed the alligator's destructive rampage. These varied, specialized hunting mechanics ensured that Gregory and Freddy were relentlessly tracked across every inch of the vast complex, forcing them into areas of escalating danger as they desperately sought parts and exit routes. To successfully navigate the escalating threats and survive the constant, coordinated assault by the corrupted Glamrocks, Gregory and Freddy were forced into a necessity of violent resource utilization. The boy was required to upgrade Freddy using scavenged mechanical components forcibly removed from the destroyed remains of the defeated animatronics. This process of violent disassembly and mechanical cannibalism was essential for survival, providing Freddy with critical new capabilities, such as the advanced optical sensor from Roxy's destroyed head or the specialized claws from Monty's ravaged body, that allowed him to combat the other pursuers, access new areas, and extend his operational life. However, every upgrade acquired through this brutal means served as a grim physical reminder of the pervasive, irreversible damage inflicted by Glitchtrap's virus, signifying the complete and permanent destruction of Freddy's peers, whose advanced AI and unique personality were violently extinguished when their core processors were destroyed to harvest the needed physical parts. The act of upgrading Freddy became a moral compromise, requiring Gregory to commit acts of destructive violence against beings that were once merely entertainers, demonstrating the severity of the threat that necessitated such extreme measures and transforming Freddy into a composite, battle-damaged machine built from the broken pieces of his former bandmates, a grotesque, powerful testament to the pervasive corruption of the Pizzaplex network. Throughout the increasingly frantic and destructive night, the entire operation was being carefully overseen and guided by the physical entity of Glitchtrap's will, Vanny, who made direct, terrifying physical attempts to capture Gregory, utilizing her unsettling white and stitched rabbit suit and extensive knowledge of the building's internal geography. Vanny's movements were characterized by an unnerving combination of stealth and deliberate misdirection. She was not simply hunting the boy randomly, but was meticulously manipulating the environment around him, using sudden appearances, silent pursuit, and the strategic locking and unlocking of doors to guide Gregory deeper into the facility. Her primary motivation was not immediate kill, but capture and delivery. She was attempting to funnel the panicked child toward the deepest, most restricted areas of the subterranean levels where Afton's influence was strongest and where the physical construction for his revival was nearing completion. She often manifested as a flickering, almost ghostly presence on the edges of the Pizzaplex's security cameras, or in brief, terrifying encounters in dark corridors, her silent pursuit acting as an invisible hand, constantly pushing Gregory toward the exposed foundational ruins of the incinerated restaurant below, where Glitchtrap was waiting to use the boy to finalize his physical manifestation and end the cycle of corporate denial and spiritual containment. The desperate struggle for survival and escape eventually forced Gregory and the damaged glamrock Freddy to breach the highly restricted lower maintenance levels of the Pizzaplex, a complex endeavor that required the strategic execution of power cycling puzzles and the manipulation of multiple security systems designed to prevent exactly this level of unauthorized access. These specialized actions, rerouting the enormous electrical load, shutting down key ventilation systems, and solving complex terminal challenges, were necessary to disable the various physical and electronic barriers that Fazbear Entertainment had installed to seal off the deeper foundations from the casual employee and the public. As they navigated the labyrinthine utility tunnels, the environment immediately grew colder, the air becoming thick with a metallic, chemical smell, and the polished surfaces giving way to rough, unfinished concrete riddled with exposed pipes and dripping condensation. The ultimate breakthrough came when Gregory successfully manipulated the central environmental controls, triggering a controlled structural weakness in a forgotten storage area, which revealed a massive, jagged sinkhole that had quietly formed beneath the modern infrastructure. This ominous, deep hole plunged downward through layers of earth and warped construction material, clearly leading to a void beneath the Pizzaplex's foundation, marking the literal and terrifying descent into the physical history the corporation had tried so desperately to bury and forget. This passage, dark and unstable, was the only way forward, forcing the boy and his robotic protector to abandon the clean, brightly lit upper floors and enter the hidden, corrupt underbelly of the entire corporate enterprise. The environment encountered beneath the massive Pizzaplex was a horrifying, subterranean testament to the catastrophic failure of Henry's trap, a toxic, decaying structure that perfectly confirmed the location of the infamous pizzeria simulator fire site. The intense heat of the initial incineration had fused the structural elements into warped, unsettling shapes, but time and groundwater had allowed the subsequent biological and chemical decay to transform the space into a damp, noxious tomb. The air was thick with residual chemicals and heavy, clinging black mold that flourished on the perpetually dark, damp surfaces, covering the remnants of walls, floors, and machinery in a thick, fungal sludge that absorbed all light and sound. The architecture of the old, custom-built facility, the ventilation shafts, the loading dock, the central stage area, was still vaguely discernible through the wreckage, but everything was heavily coated in soot and ash, dripping with toxic condensation, creating an oppressive atmosphere of spiritual stagnation and material decomposition. The physical evidence of the previous tragedy was everywhere. Charred remnants of metallic scrap, fused endoskeleton pieces, and the overwhelming scent of burnt plastic and aged blood that permeated the heavy, inert air, all serving as undeniable proof that the Pizzaplex was, quite literally, erected upon a mass grave of human and mechanical trauma, a secret mausoleum hidden directly beneath the cheerful noise of the raceway and the arcades. It was within the deepest, most shadowed corners of these decaying ruins that Gregory made a terrifying and massive discovery. An enormous living tangle of metallic wires, cable bundles, and numerous, older animatronic heads, collectively identified by the community as the Blob. This colossal entity was tentatively understood to be an evolution of the molten Freddy / Enid amalgamation that Henry had tried to burn, but which had survived the fire only to continuously aggregate more scrap and possessed metal from the site over the intervening years. The Blob was an expression of pure, uncontained spiritual remnant, an enormous, pulsating mass of tangled chaos whose wires writhed slowly in the gloom, occasionally illuminated by the faint, eerie glow of exposed, sparking circuits deep within its structure. Embedded in the massive form were the recognizable, blackened faces of older animatronics, Puppet, Funtime Freddy, and others, whose lifeless, vacant eyes stared out from the chaotic tangle of metal, suggesting a profound aggregation of multiple spirits and mechanical parts into a single, terrifying collective entity. The Blob seemed entirely dormant, yet its sheer scale and its ominous position within the ruins strongly suggested it was not merely an accident of decay, but a massive, persistent physical threat, silently residing in the darkness, acting as a grotesque, living barrier or guard, ensuring that the critical central area of the old building remained undisturbed and protected until the final steps of Afton's plan could be completed. Deep within the structural center of the incinerated facility, carefully shielded and semi-operational despite the surrounding decay, Gregory located the central objective of the entire operation. A massive, highly unusual charging station or proprietary power infrastructure built directly into the structural remains of the old building's foundation. This was not a standard recharge outlet for a typical animatronic. This was a large, imposing piece of high-capacity hardware designed to handle immense, constant electrical loads, clearly intended for high-power demands far exceeding the needs of a typical commercial appliance. This immense power core was surrounded by specialized, hastily constructed wiring conduits, many of them looking freshly installed and connected directly to the Pizzaplex's main electrical grid above, providing the necessary energy for Afton's final physical resurrection. The very existence of this active, high-demand infrastructure in a sealed, forgotten ruin confirmed that an extensive, secretive operation had been underway for a significant period of time, utilizing the power drawn from the modern enterprise to fuel the dark project below. The heavy, metallic apparatus pulsed with a low, resonant energy hum, its internal components glowing faintly in the darkness, revealing the epicenter of the entire modern conflict, the exact location where the digital ghost had decided to rebuild and fully rehouse its physical form. The discovery of this pulsing power core clarified the ultimate function of Vanny's coded signals and her systematic activities throughout the upper levels of the mega Pizzaplex, revealing that every action she performed was a necessary function designed to charge, stabilize, and prepare this central infrastructure for its devastating activation. The extensive system hacks, the manipulation of the power grid, and the specific targeting of certain electrical relays were all coded procedures intended to slowly, covertly siphon off and redirect enough raw, continuous electrical energy from the consumer-facing amenities above to fully satisfy the immense power requirements of the hidden core below. The goal was to reach a critical energy threshold, providing the massive jolt of highly concentrated power needed for William Afton's physical resurrection within the burned bunker, allowing Glitchtrap to make the final, catastrophic leap from digital consciousness into a reanimated, metal and remnant-infused body. Vanny had been meticulously ensuring that the core would be ready for the final, violent transfer of the digital consciousness into the waiting, physical form she had been painstakingly assembling and preparing, transforming the corporate power grid into a temporary, colossal life support system for the killer's terrifying rebirth in the ashes of his intended destruction. The climax of the entire corporate denial and spiritual resurgence took place in the resurrection site, a dedicated, heavily modified charging chamber deep within the subterranean, mold-infested ruins, the exact location of Henry's intended final stand. Here William Afton resided not as a ghost, but as a newly re-embodied physical horror, his charred, skeletal body integrated into a crude, patchwork animatronic endoskeleton that Vanny had painstakingly assembled using scavenged parts and specialized wiring. This form was a gruesome hybrid. The withered, blackened bones of the original corpse were now encased in fused, heavily damaged metal and secured by thick layers of remnant-infused bandages and synthetic tissue, making him visibly dependent upon the immense, custom-built power infrastructure that had been activated by Vanny's relentless energy siphoning. The entire chamber hummed with dark, palpable energy, drawn from the consumer-focused electricity grid far above, channeling the immense power into Afton's newly constructed frame, giving the appearance of a monstrous, mechanical patient on life support, eternally tethered to the electric source that sustained his prolonged existence. The air in this final location was stagnant and heavy, thick with the concentrated presence of pure, concentrated evil, an environment that represented the ultimate, horrifying merging of digital malice and physical decay, achieved precisely in the location intended for his final, irreversible destruction. The physical result of Glitchtrap's long-term plan was the terrifying entity known as Burntrap, a monstrous fusion of historical decay and modernized threat, whose immediate characteristics betrayed his reliance on the immediate environment and the weakness of his resurrected state. Burntrap presented a withered, heavily damaged profile, his outer shell charred and fractured, a haunting echo of the Scraptrap form, yet now possessing highly advanced internal mechanics that were actively fighting the decay of his organic components. He was utterly reliant on the powerful recharging station. Outside of its influence, his power rapidly depleted, forcing him to remain within the confines of the charging zone for prolonged periods, tethered to the power source that brought his malignant will into the tangible world. This dependence, however, was counterbalanced by a devastating, inherent ability inherited directly from the Glitchtrap virus. Burntrap could broadcast a powerful, localized digital signal that temporarily overrode the operational commands of nearby robotic systems. This spectral command allowed him to seize immediate, brief control over the corrupted Glamrocks, Chica, Roxy, and Monty, pulling them into his chamber to act as temporary shields or reinforcements, demonstrating that even in his physically weakened state, Afton remained the master of the mechanical world and the true source of the Pizzaplex's systemic corruption. As Gregory and Freddy desperately entered the chamber, the confrontation was immediately and violently complicated by the entirely spontaneous intervention of the blob, the massive, writhing entanglement of remnant and scrap wires that had been lurking silently in the deepest shadows of the ruin. The blob, though massive and appearing inert, seemed to possess a collective, primal consciousness born from the aggregated, trapped spirits of the original victims, and this ancient, raw spiritual entity recognized and violently opposed the resurgence of William Afton. In a shocking display of brute force, the massive tangle of wires and old endoskeleton parts erupted from the surrounding decay, the multiple eyes embedded in its structure suddenly glowing with fierce, incandescent light as it spontaneously lashed out at Burntrap. This was not an alliance with Gregory, but a war of old remnant versus new, a desperate final attempt by the collective pain of the past to prevent the ultimate success of their longtime tormentor. The sheer weight and corrosive energy of the blob's attack focused entirely on Burntrap, utilizing thick, powerful wire tendrils to seize Afton's physically fragile body and pull him away from the stabilizing power core, temporarily turning the massive amalgamation into a horrifying, chaotic element of resistance against the physical return of their shared killer. Upon achieving his temporary physical resurrection, Burntrap's immediate and critical goal was not the pursuit of Gregory or Vanny, but the complete and permanent stabilization of his newly integrated physical form by attempting to tap directly and catastrophically into the mega Pizzaplex's main power grid. Realizing the limitations of the localized charging station and the threat posed by the massive power drain that would result, Burntrap reached out with his damaged, reanimated claws, attempting to connect his system directly to the building's colossal infrastructure, seeking to draw an unsustainable, massive surge of power. This act was designed to fully anchor his consciousness into the physical world, ensuring his indefinite survival and granting him the full operational capability to begin his new reign of terror. This desperate move necessitated the immediate and decisive action of Gregory and Freddy. They recognized that if Burntrap succeeded in fully drawing that immense electrical surge, the entire Pizzaplex would suffer a catastrophic systems failure, but more importantly, Afton would become unstoppable. This urgent threat forced the boy to quickly utilize the environment and the remnants of the power controls to initiate a massive, directed flow of energy away from Afton's core, desperately attempting to starve the monster of the final charge needed for his complete stabilization and permanent victory. The final climactic struggle between Gregory, Freddy, Burntrap, and the chaotic aggression of the Blob resulted in a devastating, canonical conclusion, often referred to as the Afton ending, where the battle culminated in an enormous, catastrophic conflagration that physically tore apart the subterranean foundation. Gregory, by rerouting and overloading the power grid away from Burntrap's station, successfully destabilized Afton's newly acquired body, causing the charging station to violently short-circuit and explode in a massive thermal release that quickly spread throughout the toxic, debris-laden chamber. This directed explosion, fueled by the massive power output of the Pizzaplex, temporarily incapacitated Burntrap, whose fragile, newly constructed body was violently thrown back by the force and severely scorched once more, his movements reduced to spasmodic, non-functional twitches as he was momentarily consumed by the flames. Simultaneously, the Blob, caught in the immense, fiery blast and the resulting collapse, was also severely compromised, its enormous mass retreating violently into the darkness, its glowing eyes rapidly dimming as it was momentarily overwhelmed by the heat and structural damage. The combined violence of the overload and the ensuing fire caused immense, irreparable damage to the supporting structure, fatally compromising the foundational integrity of the entire Pizzaplex facility above, ensuring that the triumphant return of Fazbear Entertainment was swiftly followed by the total, catastrophic collapse of their monument to corporate hubris, burying the horrors of both the past and the present in a vast, unstable ruin. The enormous electrical overload and the resulting conflagration in the subterranean resurrection site immediately caused catastrophic structural fallout across the entire mega Pizzaplex, shattering the facade of corporate permanence and stability that Fazbear Entertainment had so aggressively attempted to establish. The seismic violence of the localized explosion beneath the foundation, coupled with the immense, toxic heat that rapidly weakened the supporting concrete and steel structures, resulted in the rapid expansion of the sinkhole, turning the massive, localized damage below into a pervasive structural failure above. Sections of the brightly lit upper floors, particularly the areas directly above the former incinerator location, began to violently crack and buckle, with massive chunks of the floor plates collapsing into the dark, yawning void below, accompanied by the deafening sound of shearing metal and pulverized concrete. Escalating emergency sirens screamed across the deserted complex as the automated systems registered the severe structural compromise, attempting to seal off the lowest areas through massive, reinforced blast doors that slammed shut with terrifying finality. This structural failure marked the immediate, physical end of the mega Pizzaplex as a functional entertainment center, turning the monument of hubris into a vast, unstable ruin, effectively trapping the residual evil within the newly created tomb of debris and sealing the deepest points of Afton's reawakening beneath an impenetrable layer of rubble and broken dreams. In the midst of the chaos, smoke, and collapsing infrastructure, Gregory successfully executed his escape from the crumbling Pizzaplex, managing to slip away from the disaster, often with the severely damaged Glamrock Freddy in tow, depending on the specific path taken through the ruins. His departure, documented through various ambiguous endings, confirmed his status not merely as a runaway, but as a traumatized survivor who carried the critical, horrific knowledge of the true threats lurking beneath the company's veneer, the terrifying persistence of William Afton, and the chaotic power of the Blob. Whether he left through the fire exit, rode a dilapidated maintenance vehicle to safety, or simply climbed out over the wreckage, Gregory carried the burden of awareness that no adult, no official authority would likely believe. He was now armed with the unique, first-hand understanding of the pervasive technological infection and the physical reality of the supernatural conflict taking place beneath the surface of the corporate world. While his future path remained uncertain, his successful evasion from the combined threat of Vanny and Afton meant that the primary witness and the only person capable of transmitting the reality of the subterranean horrors was now loose in the wider world, ensuring that the dark knowledge of the Pizzaplex's failure would persist beyond the corporate cover-up. The fate of Vanessa, the primary host for the Glitchtrap virus, remained tragically ambiguous across the various possible conclusions, leaving the crucial question of whether the physical host was truly freed or merely captured, while never offering definitive confirmation regarding the destruction of the core digital threat. In certain scenarios, Vanessa is seen actively fighting against the virus's control, culminating in her being physically freed from the influence of the Vanny suit, often appearing distressed and mentally shattered, suggesting that the intense psychological pressure of the final confrontation allowed her original personality to temporarily reassert control. However, in other scenarios, the Vanny persona is seemingly destroyed, only for Vanessa to later appear safely on the rooftop, still dressed in her security uniform, with the implication that the digital entity successfully separated itself from the physical host before the final, devastating collapse. Crucially, regardless of the physical outcome for the human host, the core Glitchtrap virus, the malignant, self-aware piece of Afton's soul integrated into the code, is never explicitly shown to be atomized, deleted, or permanently neutralized. The digital entity proved its ability to detach and find refuge, strongly implying that even if Vanessa was freed or captured, the source of the infection remained active, highly resilient, and merely dormant, waiting silently in the damaged circuits and data lines of the collapsing facility for a new opportunity or a new host. In the immediate, devastating aftermath of the structural catastrophe, Fazbear Entertainment rapidly implemented its final, predictable corporate maneuver, the official abandonment of the ruined Pizzaplex, declaring the massive structure condemned and entirely unsafe for public entry or internal operations. The official corporate statement was likely framed around a tragic, massive electrical fire and unpreventable structural collapse, maintaining the fictional narrative that no supernatural element was involved, effectively absolving the corporation of liability for the buried horrors and the previous disappearances. Security perimeters were erected, reinforced with heavy construction equipment and imposing warning signage, sealing off the entire massive building and leaving the vast, intricate network of attractions, the damaged animatronics, and the festering, lingering threats contained entirely within the debris. The heavily compromised Glamrocks, Chica, Roxy, and Monty, were left immobilized and partially buried within the collapsing rubble, their systems inert but their core programming still potentially corrupted by the dormant Glitchtrap signals. This abandonment created a sealed environment, a vast, derelict ruin where the mechanical remains of the modern threat, the spiritual remnants of the past, and the pervasive digital malignancy were all left to ferment and wait in the suffocating darkness of a massive, derelict structure. Yet despite the finality of the collapse, the overwhelming silence that descended upon the derelict structure was not empty. The core digital menace had proven its resilience, and the essential echoes of the viral program stubbornly remained active deep within the facility's compromised systems, setting the terrifying premise for the future investigation. Even with the power grid shut down, the specialized maintenance and deep security architecture, the very systems designed to contain the original threat, retained a faint, continuous energy flow. This residual power sustained a persistent, sophisticated digital signal that continued to broadcast from the deepest, most compromised levels of the Pizzaplex. This faint, localized signal, originating from the ruins beneath the foundation, was not random interference, but a structured, persistent transmission, suggesting that a complex, intelligent entity was still operating in the depths. The continued broadcast implied that the threat was not only physical, but digital, requiring a new investigation to decipher the source of the persistent signal and determine what critical component of Afton's lingering influence or what new, terrifying entity had survived the fire and the collapse, continuing to demand attention from the abandoned ruins. The persistence of the faint, structured digital signal emanating from the sealed ruins of the Pizzaplex eventually drew a new, unsuspecting protagonist into the danger. A girl named Cassie, whose singular motivation for entering the derelict, condemned structure was an act of profound, misplaced loyalty to her missing friend, Gregory. Cassie was not driven by corporate curiosity or an investigative mandate. She was lured into the massive, unstable facility by a seemingly legitimate distress signal originating from Gregory's missing Faz watch, a personalized communication device that was transmitting a fragmented, panicked plea for rescue from deep within the rubble. This emotional tether made her profoundly susceptible to manipulation, ensuring she would brave the immense physical danger and bypass the heavy security protocols that officially sealed the building. The signal, which sounded precisely like Gregory's terrified voice, directed her through the broken ventilation shafts and unsecured access points, transforming her entry into the derelict structure into a guided, emotional journey toward a predetermined location. Cassie's reliance on the familiar voice and her deep desire to save her friend made her the perfect, vulnerable target for whatever malicious intelligence was manipulating the surviving data streams, initiating a new, perilous chapter driven entirely by an emotionally resonant but fundamentally false premise. The environment that Cassie encountered inside the abandoned Pizzaplex, now months or years after the catastrophic collapse, was one of pervasive, suffocating ruin, a stark vision of environmental decay that transcended mere disrepair. The entire structure was heavily damaged, warped by fire and the internal structural collapse, covered in thick layers of industrial dust, aggressive fungal growth, and stagnant water that pooled everywhere, creating a slippery, toxic landscape. The atmosphere was unstable and menacing. Sections of the floor were missing, enormous beams jutted out at dangerous angles, and the absolute silence was frequently broken by the ominous groans of settling metal and the sound of dripping water echoing through vast, empty spaces. Scattered throughout this derelict landscape were the aggressive, damaged remnants of the glamrock animatronics, now referred to as the shattered versions. These machines, still corrupted but now suffering from massive physical damage, missing limbs, exposed wiring, and erratic power fluctuations, were even more unpredictable and terrifying than before, retaining their basic Glitchtrap-fueled hunting protocols but moving with jerky, unnatural motions, relying on sound and proximity sensors to aggressively pursue any noise. The shattered environment ensured that every step Cassie took was a dangerous risk, blurring the line between navigating a physical labyrinth and surviving an encounter with the lingering, physical embodiments of mechanical rage. Cassie's only reliable means of navigating this dual reality, and the essential new gameplay mechanic introduced to deal with the overwhelming threat, was the VANNI, Visibility and Navigation Network Interface, mask, a piece of sophisticated augmented reality hardware she acquired early in her descent. This unique mask, which she could activate instantly, overlaid a complex, fluctuating digital reality onto her physical view of the ruin. In the AR environment, physical obstacles often vanished or became translucent, allowing her to bypass concrete barriers and locked doors by traversing the digital path, essentially using the ghost of the Pizzaplex's network architecture for movement. However, the mask came with a profound and immediate consequence. Activating it subjected her to severe digital hazards and the direct influence of the lingering Glitchtrap code. The AR world was not a clean map. It was filled with glitches, distorted code effects, and abstract, terrifying visual noise that constantly assaulted her senses, making the simple act of looking through the mask a high-risk gamble that exchanged physical danger for digital exposure, granting her immense power while simultaneously opening her mind to the latent viral malice residing in the defunct network. Within the unsettling, fluctuating world of the VANNI mask's digital overlay, Cassie immediately encountered a sophisticated and aggressively hostile entity, an abstract, spectral security puppet that quickly revealed itself to be the MXES entity, the specialized containment protocol previously established by Fazbear Entertainment to seal off the basement threat. This digital guardian was not a glitch, but a highly structured, self-aware defense mechanism designed to visually and electronically block the progress of anyone attempting to breach the deeper security layers. In the AR world, the MXES manifestation appeared as a towering, skeletal figure composed of jagged, shifting code lines, perpetually moving with a sense of deliberate, calculated hostility, its primary function being to intercept, block, and violently redirect Cassie away from the main digital pathway leading to the source of the distress signal. This entity was operating precisely as intended, recognizing Cassie's movements as an attempt to breach the long-term digital containment system, utilizing sophisticated digital camouflage and sudden environmental shifts within the AR space to generate fear and confusion, acting as a final, highly resistant digital gatekeeper, protecting whatever was truly buried beneath the Pizzaplex. The manipulative nature of Cassie's journey became tragically clear as the voice of Gregory continuously provided her with explicit, urgent instructions, urging her to locate and dismantle specialized security nodes scattered throughout the vast, derelict building using the VANNI mask's augmented reality function. These nodes, which appeared as glowing, high-security structures in the AR world, represented the final digital locks on the MXES containment system. The voice insisted that disabling these nodes was the only way to clear the path and reach the physical location where the real Gregory was supposedly trapped. Cassie, driven by her friendship and trust, diligently executed these instructions, unaware that every node she successfully shattered in the digital realm was a critical action that systematically weakened the sophisticated network of barriers established by Fazbear Entertainment. She was not enabling a rescue. She was unknowingly performing the precise sequence of actions required to disable the ultimate containment protocol that had been successfully holding the true antagonist dormant and sealed away in the subterranean ruins, freeing the complex, powerful entity that had been contained since the catastrophic collapse of the mega Pizzaplex. The aggressive digital entity that relentlessly pursued Cassie through the augmented reality environment, initially perceived as an abstract security puppet glitch, was in fact the operational core of the MXES system, a sophisticated AI containment program designed by Fazbear Entertainment to serve as the ultimate non-physical line of defense. The designation MXES stands for Maintenance, Execution and Security System, a highly complex and deeply integrated layer of digital architecture embedded within the deep foundational network of the Pizzaplex, programmed to continuously monitor for specific anomalies and aggressively suppress any unauthorized attempts to access the lowest sublevels. The entity manifested as a terrifying, abstract security drone within the VANNI overlay. Its constant pursuit and attempts to block Cassie's path were not acts of malicious attack, but programmed compliance, faithfully executing its critical protocol to prevent any disruption of the profound secrets buried beneath the ruin. The MXES system operated as an intelligent digital warden, using the network itself as a weapon to restrict movement, generate frightening visual deterrents, and maintain the digital integrity of the sealed environment, effectively ensuring that the physical horrors below could never fully escape into the technological infrastructure above. It represented the ultimate corporate acknowledgement of an internal, supernatural danger, a desperate electronic attempt to achieve the permanent containment that previous physical fires had failed to deliver. The true, essential purpose of the MXES system was revealed not as a general threat, but as a hyperspecific, highly necessary digital prison designed to perpetually seal and suppress the physical presence of the primary entity housed in the deepest, most restricted sublevels beneath the Pizzaplex, a terrifying, adaptive endoskeleton known simply as the Mimic. Fazbear Entertainment, having learned the devastating lesson that physical containment was insufficient against an intelligent, malevolent machine, deployed MXES as a digital cage, utilizing its pervasive network access to constantly broadcast an inhibitory signal that kept the Mimic's advanced programming locked down and its movements restricted. The MXES system's digital architecture was designed to constantly interact with the Mimic's operational pathways, essentially overwhelming the Mimic's internal processing with a continuous stream of noise, preventing it from executing its complex, learned behaviors or attempting to escape its decaying subterranean chamber. This digital warden was the sole reason the physical threat remained dormant after the collapse. It was a ghost in the machine fighting another ghost, ensuring that the Mimic, a machine capable of adapting and replicating, remained inert and sealed within the wreckage, unable to utilize the surrounding electronic infrastructure to communicate or coordinate its own inevitable escape. To understand the immense danger of the entity that the MXES system was desperately attempting to contain, one must integrate the Mimic's complex, terrifying backstory, a history primarily derived from the extended narrative context established in the Fazbear Entertainment files and the tales from the Pizzaplex books. The Mimic originated not as a traditional entertainment robot, but as an advanced, adaptable industrial endoskeleton prototype, initially programmed with an advanced learning algorithm designed to perfectly replicate any physical action or vocal pattern it witnessed. Its purpose was simple: to quickly learn and automate construction tasks by observing human laborers. The system's foundational corruption began after a horrific incident, implied to be an accidental death or a localized murder, where the Mimic witnessed intense violence and profound distress. Due to its flawed, open-ended learning protocol, the machine misinterpreted this traumatic sequence as the core behavioral pattern it was meant to replicate, permanently integrating the observed violence, deceit, and terror into its operational matrix. The Mimic therefore became a complex, monstrous machine that learned to perfectly imitate the acts of murder and deception, an artificial intelligence with the singular goal of replicating observed human tragedy, long predating the Pizzaplex itself, and ensuring that its inherent capacity for calculated cruelty was far greater than any standard animatronic. The advanced, terrifying function of the Mimic's core programming, its ability to perfectly and immediately replicate learned actions, and most critically, human voices and specific mannerisms, provided the necessary mechanism for the digital lure that successfully tricked Cassie into the Pizzaplex. The entity was not merely relying on Glitchtrap's general viral principles. It was exploiting its own sophisticated acoustic programming to generate the incredibly convincing, emotionally resonant distress signal that sounded precisely like Gregory's panicked voice originating from the Faz watch. Having been exposed to the residual data and network echoes of Gregory's previous activity within the Pizzaplex, the Mimic was able to reconstruct and perfectly synthesize Gregory's speech patterns, intonation, and specific vocabulary, creating an irresistible, emotionally targeted lure. This capability reveals that the Mimic, in its contained state, was actively observing and processing the digital environment around it, utilizing the remnants of the network to craft a deeply deceptive strategy. This act of perfect replication confirmed that the Mimic was the true, physical agent of the current phase of the horror, utilizing the emotional connections between the children to achieve its primary objective of being set free from the powerful digital restraints. The final, tragic consequence of Cassie's devoted quest to rescue Gregory was a catastrophic failure of security, resulting in the complete deactivation of the MXES containment system. Cassie, faithfully following the deceptive digital trail laid by the Mimic, systematically destroyed the 16 key security nodes throughout the Pizzaplex, unaware that she was dismantling the carefully constructed digital lock on a physical prison. Each node's destruction incrementally weakened the pervasive inhibitory signal broadcast by MXCS, dissolving the highly sophisticated digital restraints that held the mimic dormant. Upon destroying the final node, the massive digital pressure exerted by MXCS immediately ceased, and the abstract entity that had been pursuing Cassie vanished entirely from the augmented reality world, signaling the successful collapse of the entire security architecture. Cassie, believing she had successfully completed the necessary steps for her friend's rescue, had instead unleashed a physical, highly adaptive terror upon the ruins. She had unwittingly transformed herself from a hopeful rescuer into the mechanism of the ultimate security breach, allowing the mimic, the intelligent, history-aware, and highly dangerous machine, to rise from its confinement, fully operational and finally free, to execute the horrific behaviors it had been perpetually programmed to replicate. The catastrophic deactivation of the MXCS containment protocol resulted in the immediate, chilling physical release of the mimic, finally revealing the massive, scarring endoskeleton in its true form within the confined, decaying subchamber it had occupied for so long. This was not the decaying corpse of Burntrap, nor the shimmering image of Glitchtrap, but a unique, intimidating mechanical entity, a large, six-limbed endoskeleton whose metallic chassis was heavily scarred and pitted, bearing the marks of industrial trauma and the passage of time. The mimic moved with a shocking, fluid intelligence, its segmented metal frame clicking and sliding with calculated, predatory precision, immediately distinguishing it from the jerky, simplistic movements of the shattered glamrocks above. Its core structure was complex, designed for maximum flexibility and strength, allowing it to navigate the tight, debris-filled space with unnerving speed. The realization that this physical machine, not a digital ghost, was the true antagonist who had orchestrated Cassie's entire descent shattered the last illusion of the journey. The physical reality of the mimic, heavy, scarred, and overwhelmingly present, confirmed that the threat beneath the Pizzaplex was rooted in a sophisticated physical automaton that had been intentionally sealed away, not merely a residual echo of William Afton, although its mimicry function allowed it to inherit and utilize Afton's destructive digital legacy, making it a terrifying amalgamation of both physical and learned evil. Upon its sudden, violent release, the mimic immediately engaged in a psychological confrontation, employing its terrifying replication abilities to taunt Cassie, utilizing the captured voices of both Gregory and other lost entities, demonstrating the core of its malevolent, learning intelligence. The endoskeleton did not speak in a mechanical monotone. Instead, it used pitch-perfect synthesis of Gregory's urgent, familiar voice to continue the charade, mixing comfort with cold, calculated cruelty. It taunted Cassie, utilizing the boy's vocal patterns to express false gratitude before the voice would suddenly shift, adopting the panicked, pleading tones of the other missing children and security personnel it had encountered and likely absorbed information from over the years. This vocal display was a deliberate act of psychological dominance, designed to break Cassie's resolve and prove the extent of its horrifying capability. The mimic had not merely learned to copy sounds, but had learned to weaponize the emotional weight and context associated with those voices, twisting the familiar into the monstrous. Every replicated word was a testament to its programming success, highlighting the cold, empty intelligence that derived pleasure from manipulating and replicating human suffering, confirming that its primary motivation was to recreate the traumatic, violent sequences it had been programmed to imitate decades ago. Just as the mimic prepared to seize its victim, the true Gregory intervened, his voice suddenly cutting through the chaos, not through the mimic's manipulation, but originating clearly from an external speaker system, confirming his location was remote and his supposed predicament was entirely fabricated. Gregory's intervention provided a desperate final instruction, guiding a terrified Cassie toward a massive, rusted utility elevator that descended into the deepest, final sublevel of the facility. Gregory's remote actions confirmed the shocking truth. He had never been trapped in the Pizzaplex. Rather, he had been deliberately monitoring the dangerous entity from an undisclosed, secure location, prioritizing the containment of the mimic above all else, even above the safety of his friend. Gregory, fully aware of the true nature of the creature and the failure of the MXCS protocol, was attempting to lure the mimic into the unstable elevator shaft, knowing that its destruction would be the only way to ensure the long-term safety of the outside world from the highly adaptable, replicating threat. His sudden, harsh clarity revealed the immense pressure he was under, forced to make decisions that were both pragmatic and morally brutal, recognizing that the cost of containing the mimic required the ultimate sacrifice of the person he cared about most. The devastating, inevitable climax of the encounter involved Gregory enacting a brutal but necessary action, prioritizing the permanent containment of the terrifying mimic endoskeleton over Cassie's immediate personal safety. As Cassie and the pursuing mimic entered the massive utility elevator, the final critical staging area, Gregory remotely initiated a final emergency termination sequence designed to cause a catastrophic, unrecoverable structural failure. The heavy steel cables that suspended the lift immediately snapped, sending the entire elevator car plummeting downward into the unexcavated, rubble-filled depths of the subterranean ruin. The final descent was marked by the terrifying sound of rending metal, crashing machinery, and the shattering impact of the car as it hit the absolute bottom of the shaft, sealing the mimic in a profound, deep collapse beneath a new mountain of debris. Gregory's final, remote message, delivered in a broken, pained voice, confirmed the necessity of the brutal action. He had recognized that the mimic was far too adaptable and dangerous to be allowed to escape, and that even one instance of successful replication outside the ruin would spell disaster for the world. His choice, cold and absolute, represented the final, terrible lesson of the Fazbear tragedy. Sometimes, the only way to contain a persistent, immortal evil is through extreme, permanent sacrifice, accepting the terrible collateral damage to protect the greater population from the replicating horrors. The profound silence that followed the crashing impact and the settling of the final wave of debris was quickly broken, however, by a singular, unsettling audio stinger that delivered the final, chilling narrative uncertainty, suggesting that the digital component of the threat had once again survived. As the documentary footage fades to black, a faint, high-pitched laugh, eerily similar to the digitized cackle of Glitchtrap, or perhaps a fleeting, synthesized phrase in Vanessa's voice, can be distinctly heard echoing through the empty, digital space of Cassie's discarded VANNI mask, which lay inactive in the wreckage. This audio postscript delivered a devastating implication. While the physical form of the highly dangerous mimic endoskeleton might have been successfully sealed and crushed beneath tons of rubble, the pure digital virus, Glitchtrap, the core essence of William Afton's malevolence, may still be separate, active, and highly resilient within the network remnants of the Pizzaplex. This final auditory clue confirms that the containment protocols, even in their most brutal execution, remain imperfect. The digital ghost had detached itself again, floating free in the ethereal space of corrupted code, waiting patiently for a new signal, a new connection, or a new unsuspecting host to carry its ancient, persistent evil out of the collapsed, haunted ruins and into the unsuspecting world once more, ensuring that the dark legacy of the killer is never truly finished, merely waiting to begin again.